You ever read a book and thought, "Oh, this book is good," and you read a little bit more, and you kind of like you start to change your mind. I think, "Oh, maybe this book is a little bit better than good." Uh, and as you read a little bit more, you think, "Okay, this book is great. What happened?" That's kind of the reaction I had to Shogun when I read it a couple years ago. That's definitely what happened here with Robert McCammon's 1989 novel, The Wolf's Hour. I really thought early on in this book that it was going to be like Brian Lumley's Necroscope, and it kind of is. And I think if you like Necroscope, that you're going to like The Wolf's Hour. So that's easy. If you like Necroscope and you're looking for something else to read, Robert McCammon's The Wolf's Hour is for you. If you've already read The Wolf's Hour, you might go read Necroscope. We can get to that in a second. But because this cover is kind of misleading. It makes it seem very like the supernatural is a really heavy focus, and it really isn't. Kind of in the same way Blackwater that Chris from Liminal Spaces and Brian from Bad Taste Books and I all talked and chatted about over on Chris's channel, where that book is like, as Brian said, like 95% family drama and like 5% supernatural. Similar here. It's only about 30-ish% supernatural stuff, right? The supernatural thing does not take over. In Necroscope, it sort of takes over. Like everybody's got supernatural stuff going on. It seems like those supernatural characters are the big players. If you're not supernatural, you're kind of out of the picture. That's not the case here. Michael Gallatin is a spy for the Allies during World War II, and he's going to enter Nazi-occupied Europe and recover some, basically find out what the Germans are planning, because D-Day is coming up, and they feel that something is going on. The Germans kind of must know about it, and they have something going on that's going to undo D-Day. It's going to ruin it, and so they're trying to find out what that is and stop it. So they come find Michael Gallatin, and Michael Gallatin happens to be a werewolf. The book starts kind of crazy. We are in Africa, and this wolf steals these secret documents from this Nazi officer that lands in Africa. Steals it, and then there's like this whole like chase on motorcycle and car where they're shooting at this wolf, and it's running around, and the wolf leads them into a minefield, and they blow up and they die. Then we cut away and we see Michael Gallatin and his relationship with this woman, and she sort of has had many lovers in the past, right? But she thinks Michael is different, and they have very passionate love, right? And then not long after we get a scene of that, she's executed by this German assassin who's also looking for Michael. He comes for Michael. He and Michael have this insane, crazy battle where, like, I think this German assassin, like, has like a mace or something, and he's swinging this mace around, and Michael grabs a broadsword, and they're fighting, and then at some point Michael turns into a werewolf and kills this guy. But of course he's very upset about this woman who has been killed, and he sort of like goes into semi-retirement until I think it's a few years later, this British and American like upper echelon, sort of like higher tier officers come to try and recruit Michael to do some spy work for them. Something's going on. They need him to go to Nazi-occupied Paris and find out some information from someone who the Germans have control of. Who's sort of like an agent for the Allies, but they can't get to him, can't talk to him because he's surrounded by Germans. And it's kind of great. I mean, there is a sense of it like being like Michael is like super competent, at least early. But I kind of want to say that that's not true, because the more you read this book, the more you see that Michael is very competent, that he'll definitely dive in, but that McCammon has no problem abusing him, and he definitely does not always win. He doesn't have a lot. You would think him being a werewolf would mean he would have like lots of easy victories, and he just doesn't. He doesn't. Occasionally that helps him. It does help him. It's a tool in his toolkit as being a spy and a man of action, I guess you could say. But it's not the thing that usually decides the scenario. And I don't even really like saying like spy and man of action because that makes it seem too dismissible, too light. And I think the novel's a little deeper. It has a little bit more going on than that. We also get some great scenes of Michael in Russia with his family and how his family are killed. And then Michael is raised by werewolves. And so and also how like Michael ends up being basically the last werewolf. And really he is functionally in the current, the present in the novel, right? Not the flashback stuff. He's the only supernatural entity that we see. We don't see a bunch of people like we do in Necroscope or something. He's the only one, and like I said, there's many times where like there's a encounter, some sort of decision is there's a fight or something's going on, and Michael's ability to be a werewolf might help him, but it isn't really something that he can always use. For a few reasons. One, the type of werewolf that Michael is just a big wolf. So we can turn into a wolf, a big wolf that he has human intelligence, but he can just, he's not like a 10-foot tall hulking beast or monstrosity, right? There is this sort of sense that he can sort of like half turn a little bit, and that happens a few times, but it's not something that he readily employs. It's a difficult process. And I think McCammon does a good job of sort of like laying down some like ground rules or something about how it works that makes it not particularly easy. It's not necessarily very fast, though it could be depending on how the situation for Michael. It's not something that happens very fast. He can do like partial transformation stuff, or he does a few times, but it's not something very easy for him to control. Also, there's a sense of like, I think your time as a wolf, it's like you age as a wolf. So the book says, well, if you're a wolf, then for a year, then you age 7 years, right, or something like that. So you don't want to live as a wolf too long because the time is sped up for you. Then, right, you'll grow old too soon. And then also, I thought it was also great that McCammon adds in that it's a very painful thing to happen. And so at one point when Michael changes back a couple times in a row, he becomes completely exhausted because of all the pain, and he's really sore. And I thought that was all that stuff I thought was really great, sort of like logical limitations on Michael's changing ability, right? It's not particularly fast. It's not always easy to do. Sometimes it comes on when he doesn't want it to. It's not at all tied to the phases of the moon or anything else. I thought all that stuff was really great. I thought it was really well done. I thought it made it very logical. And it doesn't feel very supernatural. And we don't really get any explanation of why or anything else. I thought that was all great. I thought it was handled really well. It just kind of comes in as being, I think really this is like a war novel, like a really good like spy espionage, like action war novel that the main character happens to be a werewolf. Right? It just so happens that he's a werewolf. And I think that's probably the right tone. I think that's probably appropriate. Really, really well written. I would definitely say, I hate, forgive me if you don't like hearing this, but I would say that McCammon is definitely a better writer than Lumley was. I would say he's on par with Clavell, if maybe not even sometimes a little better. I know Shogun, I felt the dialogue was a little stilted. I did not feel that in The Wolf's Hour. I will say the book does lean on a couple 80s tropes, what I would think of as 80s action tropes, a bit too heavily. There's a healthy amount of neck snapping, like whoosh, and like turning somebody's head around. There's a lot of that. I mean, I don't know, 4 or 5 of them maybe at least. I want to say there's at least 4. I feel confident in saying there's 4 instances of that technique being used. Way more than I think is appropriate, honestly. But whatever. And there's also sort of like a hyperbolic sort of thing that McCammon does where like somebody's grip is so tight it's going to shatter the bones in this guy's hand. Or if he falls on his back will splinter and break. And it just seemed a little bit extreme. It's like, I think he would just get hurt. I don't know if he would necessarily shatter his back. But that's okay. It's just sort of like amping it up. And there's also some times where I feel like we're given like a slight gross out moment to sort of amp up the horror. But I think the horror element is kind of turned down, honestly. I don't really feel like it's a lot stronger in the first half than it is in the second. I think In the second half, the horror is more like the stuff the Germans are doing, right? The horror, that's really the horror side of it. And there is a really sort of great sense sometimes where you get these villains that aren't cartoonish either. I feel like that's something I really liked. Again, I'm comparing it to Necroscope because I think they're close. That there's a bit of cartoonishness sometimes to the villains in Necroscope that I didn't get from Wolf Hour at all. They're horrible people, and as they ought to be. And it's really, I don't know, I guess you could say like rewarding when you see Michael get those victories over them that are kind of hard won, right? I don't think that you would think that being a werewolf he would get these easy victories, and I don't think he really ever does. He has to fight hard for them, right? McCammon is not gentle on his hero, right? He definitely gets abused a lot. And as I said, the second half of the novel really sort of steps it up. There's a sort of like, you get so much more invested. It really feels like you're getting, I don't know if paid off is quite right, but it really feels like it has more punch in the second half of this book. There's a lot of really great, I think, call outs to stuff from earlier in the book where you get like more emotional impact, right? It uses some of the stuff that had happened earlier in the novel, conflicts or like losses that had happened earlier in the novel, and it uses those for emotional impact in the back half of the novel that I thought worked really well. It ended up being just a really, really excellent book. I have no critique of McCammon's writing at all. I think really it's great, apart from him using, like I said, those 80s tropes. I think that can be forgiven. I mean, I think it can be forgiven, but it was just sort of very humorous to me that it's just like so many necks are being snapped right now. It is just crazy. Not all by the main character, I don't think. Anyway, but it's so good, and it's also very a lot of traveling, right? So you get lots of, we're in Paris, we're in Berlin, we're in this like weird like creepy German experiment island where they're doing some stuff, right? There's a actual fight inside of a flying airplane. There's just so much. Oh, there's this crazy fight that happens on a train. I didn't even mention the train. The train fight is just nuts, like a tunnel of death. Just so good, so much fun. I should have said this from the beginning, right? This book is super fun, and it's super good. So it's just super. God damn it. Robert McCammon's The Wolf Hour is a fantastic book. I think if you enjoy Necroscope, you should read it. If you like, it doesn't lean heavily on the horror stuff. It's definitely like a really great World War II action drama that really, I feel like, hits a lot harder in the second half than I expected. I found it had a lot more impact, a lot more like thoughtful writing happening than I expected. I thought it was really well handled. Honestly, it did not feel like it went for the cheap stuff. It felt like McCammon really knew where to take the narrative, knew what to do, knew when he needed to pause, and makes such good choices too about how those conflicts are resolved. I really expected, our main character Michael to just wolf out or whatever and start tearing people's throats out left and right, and that really doesn't happen. Instead, he has to win those fights hard, and he gets hurt, and he gets shot, and his friends get killed, and other things happen, and it's brutal sometimes, but it makes sense, and it works so well as a novel. You become very invested in these characters. If you're wondering if you should read this, I think that you probably should. That's it. That's the review. That's all I got. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Virgil. This is Literally Books. A like and subscribe is appreciated. I always put this at the end, and why do I do that? Not because it makes sense. Chris and I have got another live show coming up on Tuesday. We're going to have Richard from Vintage SF on there. It's going to be awesome. Richard, of course, we've talked before, so it'd be really cool to sit down and talk to Richard, right? In a time period that is less than 7 hours, right? Little does he know. Tuesday afternoon, the time will be posted. It'll be a thing. It'll be on Chris's channel, the live show coming up. That's it.